Hi, my name is Robin Morris, and this is my book report submission for SPAD 560. For this assignment, I chose to read College Sports on the Brink of Disaster by Labar and Paul. I chose this book because I find it interesting how professionalizing college athletics could essentially have an impact on our K through 12 youth. By professionalizing college athletics, we are moving amateurism to high school, and that makes me wonder what kind of pressure will this add to these children. As discussed in Module 2 of youth sports, there's already a lot of pressure to perform and succeed on our youth. This is just adding one more factor. At what point will high school athletics become professionalized, and where do we draw the line between amateurism and professionalism? Writing this, it made me think about if we keep drawing that line far down the road, we might live to see professional kindergarten kickball. I think that's totally absurd. However, it makes me wonder again, where do we draw that line? When does it stop? This book was divided into 4 sections. The first one looked into the history of college athletics and highlighted key events that influenced how modern athletics are implemented today. This included developments such as the NCAA, Title IX, and the Scholar Athlete. It also looked into certain controversies regarding sports betting, point shaving, rigging games. That all came to surface in 1951. It also looked into TV's influence on the image of college athletics, and finally discussed concussions in college athletics. Section 2 and 3 look at John Labar's experience as head tennis coach at Duke. Section 2 highlighted athletes that represented the 6 core principles that Labar believed to embody an exceptional scholar athlete. These principles included passion through David Robinson, courage through Nancy Hogshead McCarr, empathy through Clinton B. Davis II, discipline through Will White, intellect through John Stauffer, and faith through Mark Myers. In addition to these athletes, he mentioned Paul Arbach's ripple effects with his developments and efforts in wilderness medicine. Paul Arbach specifically, I found interesting as I am a wilderness first responder. I'm actually getting recertified in October, and some of his work I have read and had to implement in the field. So just a very neat, interesting personal tie to this reading. Some of the stuff I liked about this section was the storytelling style of writing. It kept me engaged as I read about these scholars athletes and their impacts that they had on the world as doctors, lawyers, and educators. I also really appreciated the imagery that they put in the book, as it further allowed me to connect with these individuals and understand what their efforts and works went towards. One of the cons, however, was that some of these stories were too long, and it made it occasionally difficult to relate it back to the scholar athlete. I often found myself wondering, this is interesting, but how does it relate back to college athletics? Was this section necessary, or could it have been omitted to make the chapter clearer and more impactful? I feel as though section 2 could have been cut in half with the same, if not better, impact that it had on the reader. So like I said, I really enjoyed it, but some of it felt too long. Details such as how athletes met their spouses, I feel like the author could have omitted while still conveying the same message to the reader. And essentially that would make it more clear, as I wouldn't be confused on what does this have to do with the book. Section 3 analyzes John Labar's coaching experience at Duke, specifically highlighting the wins and losses of his tennis team. It then goes into some of the struggles he's faced at Duke and ultimately the reasons why he left coaching, which had to do with feeling undervalued and undersupported. He was overworked, and then ultimately what led to him leaving was the denial of the request of having an administrative assistant. And then finally, he remembered his friend and assistant coach Jim Bonk and the impacts he had not only on Duke tennis, but the Duke community or school community as a whole. So essentially, the book has highlighted the history and importance of the scholar athlete, and then examples of it, what it looks like. Specifically, it looks at the influence and importance of balancing academics and athletics through these examples. So section 4 investigates arguments against professionalizing college athletics. Their main points are that coaches are overpaid, the lack of budget then falls on the students, who must pay tuition, which is funding coaches, but it should be spent on funding student athletics and academics. The example that stood out to me the most for this was Charlie Wise, who got paid $26.4 million for not coaching at 2 schools. This cost should not land on student tuitions. This burden should not end up on the students. Another argument is that there has been a collapse of public trust due to corrupt leadership who prioritizes monetary gain over education. This goes to support private interests, such as rich coaches and college presidents. There needs to be more federal oversights where an unaffiliated third party can hold these individuals accountable. When accountability takes place, public trust is achieved. So, looking at comprehensive reforms, the first thing the book mentions is that there is a lack of organized constituency to demand secure action. However, Knight Commissioner recommends reforms in revenue distribution. This can be seen through the 50% rule, where 50% of revenue would go to supporting college athletics, education, health, safety, and well-being, while providing a broad base opportunities for minority and oppressed groups, putting academics first. Establishing an oversight entity to revenue distribution that includes 5 core principles of full transparency, independent oversight, gender equity, broad-based sports opportunities, and financial opportunities. The development of the NCFA, which would generate and distribute revenue directly back to institutions to utilize for educational and athletic usage. And then reestablishment of public trust, so ending freshman eligibility to play varsity sports, drastically reducing practice requirements, normalizing dorm life, focusing more on classes that support the athlete's interest rather than an athletic-friendly curriculum, closing gaps in educational opportunities for minority groups, eliminating standardized testing, and clustering athletes in specific classes and majors, supporting historically Black colleges, base scholarships on a need basis to support disadvantaged backgrounds, and attracting more minority groups into positions of power such as coaches, admin, and directors. So while I agree with the author's reform, he mentions that these ideas only work if they are put and implemented into a plan. This makes me question, what would the plan look like? Are there any current groups or efforts working towards not professionalizing college athletics? If so, who and what does their plans and efforts look like? And then what are some of the current events regarding this effort? Now, as I mentioned before, it says that one of the biggest struggles right now is a lack of organized constituency to demand action. So even if it's not existent, to him, what would this plan look like, and what are some of the steps that we could do moving forward? What are actionable steps? So personally, I agree with the author's stance that college athletics should focus on academics first, then on athletics. My great-grandfather used to tell my mom, and then she always told me growing up, that you can lose your job, but you can never have too much education, as it is something that someone can never take away from you. They can take your car, they can take your job, they can take your house, but no one can take your brain. You can never have too much knowledge. Through scholarships, athletics can pave the way to successful, fulfilling lives. This specifically serves disadvantaged minority groups by providing them with opportunities that would not be traditionally available to them. College athletics can pave the way for people like William H. Lewis, who through football earned a law degree through Harvard, eventually working his way to the highest position held by an African American at the time as Attorney General of the United States. I found this example specifically inspiring, considering that he did all of this post-Civil War, like right after it, which everything's held against him, yet he was able to work his way up to this position through college athletics. Chapter 5 closely aligns with my values through quotes such as, "We are missing the opportunity to build a whole charade of leaders who can have a great impact on human society. The social benefit of a free education of playing sports has been lost. The true avatars of excellence in American culture are not the quarterbacks who can throw a ball 50 yards. Instead, they are young men and women who prepare for demanding careers in law, medicine, architecture, business, and other realms that will last for 50 years. This personally relates to me as a PE teacher, and the next section that I'm going to read all has to do with my career and the message and influence impact that I want to have on my students. So while I want my students to develop proficient physical skills, I also highly emphasize the importance of lifelong skills taught in physical education classes. skills that similarly will teach them key life skills such as communication, cooperation, trust, and safety. When my students graduate, it is not my hope that they will become pro athletes, but rather the long term goal of developing into happy, healthy, successful adults. And I think that this philosophy further supports the idea of valuing academics over athletics. And through the professionalization of sports, it's the other way around, where we are now wanting to create celebrities over scholars. And while that might be fine for the some, it doesn't support all of them. And post college, if they don't make it into the NFL or the NBA or the NHL, what is their plan? If they get hurt, as mentioned in the book, when they tear their ACL or get a concussion or something else that inhibits them from continuing their athletic careers, what's left for them later on in life? And if this is through college athletics, I think it's the duty of the organization to provide them with a key education to similarly lead happy, healthy, productive, successful lives. That is my book report. Thank you.